Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. In the high mountains, where the peaks cut through the clouds like knives of stone, there was a legend older than memory itself. It was said that in those mist-shrouded heights lay the sky wings, an ancient relic that granted its bearer the power of flight, to soar like a bird and command the winds. Those who wore the wings would feel the freedom of the open sky, unrestricted by the earth below. But with such power came a price, a responsibility that few could fathom, let alone carry. It was a tale known to many, but believed by few. And for most, it remained just that, a tale. For Kale, however, it was a promise. Kale stood at the edge of the cliff, his bow strapped across his back, wind tousling his dark hair. His village lay far below, a tiny speck amidst the vast wilderness that stretched for miles. The rolling hills, the forests, the rivers, they were all beautiful, yes, but they were also a prison. Kale longed for something more, something beyond the limits of the earth. The sky wings were real, he knew it. They had to be. And if anyone could find them, it was him. He took a deep breath, feeling the wind tug at him, as if urging him to leap into the abyss. But he wasn't ready, yet. The village had always been his home, and he was known as one of its finest archers. With every arrow he nocked, he felt the wind guiding his aim, as if the air itself whispered to him. But skill alone wasn't enough to satisfy his restless soul. He wanted freedom, true freedom, the kind that only the wings could provide. The decision had been made days ago. He would leave. The village could keep its quiet life, its simple ways. Kale would journey to the mountains and find the sky wings. He would escape the confines of the earth and finally know what it meant to be free. The path ahead was treacherous. Kale knew it wouldn't be easy. The silver peaks, where the wings were rumored to be hidden, were dangerous and unforgiving. Even the bravest hunters from neighboring villages had turned back, claiming the mountains were cursed, or that strange things lurked in the mists. Kale, though, was not deterred. If anything, the stories only strengthened his resolve. He packed lightly, his bow, a quiver of arrows, a small satchel of food, and his father's old hunting knife. The villagers watched as he prepared to leave, their faces a mix of concern and disbelief. Most thought he was chasing a dream, a fool's errand. But there was one face among the crowd that stood out, a frail, old woman with eyes as sharp as the mountain air. She stepped forward, her voice rasping with age. "You seek the sky wings," she said, her words more a statement than a question. Kale nodded, adjusting the strap of his quiver. "I do." The old woman chuckled softly, her laugh like the rustle of dried leaves. "Many have sought them. None have returned." "I'm not like the others," Kale replied, his voice firm. "I'll find them." The woman's gaze seemed to pierce through him, as if she were searching for something deeper. Finally, she nodded, her smile fading into a serious expression. "The winds are fickle, boy. They can lift you up, or they can tear you apart. Remember that." With those cryptic words, she turned and disappeared into the crowd. Kale watched her go, her warning echoing in his mind. But he shook it off. He had come too far to be swayed by the doubts of others. The sky wings were his destiny. The first leg of the journey was deceptively easy. The path through the foothills was well trodden, and the weather was mild. Kale moved swiftly, his boots crunching on the dry ground, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the silver peaks. By nightfall, he reached the edge of the forest that bordered the mountains. The trees towered above him, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, as if welcoming him to the wild. Kale set up camp beneath a large oak, lighting a small fire to ward off the chill. The stars twinkled above, and for a moment, he felt a sense of peace. The world was quiet, save for the soft rustling of leaves and the distant call of a night bird. He lay back on his bedroll, staring up at the sky. It was vast, endless, full of possibilities. He closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep, dreams of flight filling his mind. Morning came too quickly. The sun had barely risen when Kale packed up his camp and continued his journey. The forest was dense, the air thick with the scent of pine and moss. As he ventured deeper, the trees grew taller, their trunks thick and gnarled, like ancient sentinels guarding a long-forgotten secret. The path became steeper, and Kale had to stop frequently to catch his breath. Still, he pressed on, driven by the knowledge that each step brought him closer to the wings. By midday, he reached the base of the mountains. The silver peaks loomed ahead, their jagged summits piercing the sky. Kale paused to drink from his canteen, his eyes fixed on the challenge before him. The air was colder here, thinner, and the wind had picked up, whipping through the trees like an invisible force. It was then that he saw the first sign, a feather. Not just any feather, but one unlike any he had ever seen. It was long and sleek, shimmering in the sunlight with an iridescent glow. Kale knelt down and picked it up, turning it over in his hands. It was light, impossibly light, yet strong. His heart quickened. This was no ordinary bird feather. This was a sign. The wings were near. He tucked the feather into his quiver and continued onward, his pace quickening. The path became rougher, more treacherous. Loose rocks slid beneath his feet, and jagged cliffs rose on either side, casting long shadows. Kale moved carefully, his eyes darting between the rocks, ever alert for any sign of danger. As he climbed higher, the wind grew stronger, howling through the narrow mountain passes like a living thing. It pulled at his clothes, tugged at his hair, as if testing him, seeing if he was worthy. But Kale was resolute. He would not be turned back. Hours passed, the climb becoming more difficult with each step. The air was thin, making it hard to breathe, and his legs burned with exhaustion. But then, just as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Kale saw it, a glimmer in the distance. High up on the mountainside, nestled between two towering peaks, was a temple. It was ancient, its stone walls weathered and worn by time, but there was no mistaking what it was. This was the Sky Temple, the place where the wings were said to reside. Kale's heart pounded in his chest as he approached, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The temple was far larger than he had expected, its massive stone doors carved with intricate symbols. As he neared, the wind seemed to still, as if holding its breath in anticipation, and then, from the shadows of the temple, a figure emerged, a tall, slender man with eyes as blue as the sky and hair that flowed like the wind itself. He moved with an unnatural grace, his feet barely touching the ground as he approached. "I am Zephyr," the figure said, his voice like the soft rustle of leaves. "And you, Kale, have come seeking the sky wings." Kale stood frozen, staring at Zephyr. He had expected challenges on his journey, perhaps even an encounter with something mystical, but a wind spirit? He had thought those were only stories told to children around the fire. Yet here stood Zephyr, his very presence making the air feel alive, charged with unseen power. "I seek the sky wings," Kale said, voice steady despite his racing heart. "I've traveled far for them." Zephyr circled him slowly, his eyes gleaming with curiosity and something deeper, perhaps amusement. "And why, mortal, do you believe you are worthy of such power?" His voice was gentle, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 winds. "Many have come here, hoping to claim the wings, to fly, to command the skies. Most never returned. Kale met his gaze, refusing to flinch. I don't come to command. I come to be free. To feel what it's like to soar, to escape the chains of the earth. Zephyr stopped, standing just inches from him now. The wind is not a thing to be escaped, nor is it a force to be controlled, Zephyr said, his voice soft yet penetrating. It can lift you up, yes, but it can also dash you against the rocks. To fly with the wind, you must first understand it. Kale frowned, unsure of the spirit's meaning. I've traveled through the mountains, felt the wind on my back as I made my way here. Isn't that understanding enough? Zephyr chuckled, a sound like leaves swirling in the breeze. There is much more to the wind than a mortal mind can comprehend. To truly claim the sky wings, you must do more than endure the wind. You must learn its wisdom, its temperament. Are you prepared for that? Kale nodded, though doubt gnawed at him. I am. Zephyr's gaze lingered on Kale for a long moment before he smiled, a smile that was both kind and mischievous, like the wind itself. Very well, then. Let us begin. Without warning, Zephyr raised a hand, and the wind exploded to life around them. It swirled violently, ripping at Kale's clothes and pulling him off his feet. He tumbled through the air, desperately trying to regain control, but the wind had him now, carrying him higher and higher, away from the temple, into the sky. Panic surged through him as the ground became a distant blur below. Do not fight it, Zephyr's voice echoed in the wind. Surrender. Kale's instinct was to resist, to struggle against the gale that tossed him like a leaf in a storm. But Zephyr's words echoed in his mind, surrender. With a deep breath, he stopped fighting. He let go, allowing the wind to carry him. To his surprise, the wind softened. It no longer felt like an enemy trying to tear him apart, but like a gentle hand guiding him through the sky. His body relaxed, and for the first time, he felt what it was like to truly fly, not as a bird or a man with wings, but as something lighter, freer. The air cradled him, lifting him higher and higher until the sky was all he could see. For what felt like hours, Kale drifted on the currents of air, letting them take him wherever they pleased. There was no fear, no resistance. Only peace. When at last the wind began to slow, it gently deposited him back on the mountain's edge, where Zephyr stood waiting, arms crossed. Kale staggered as his feet touched the ground, his legs trembling from the surreal experience. Zephyr gave him an approving nod. You are learning. Kale blinked, still breathless from what had just happened. What was that? The wind will never bow to you, Kale, Zephyr said. But it will carry you, if you let it. You cannot control the air, but you can move with it. That is the first lesson. Kale nodded, still processing the experience. It was nothing like the flights he had imagined, but in a way, it was even more profound. He had felt truly weightless, as if he belonged to the wind itself. There are more lessons, Zephyr continued, and they will not all be so gentle. Are you ready to continue? Kale's heart pounded. He had come this far, he couldn't turn back now. I am. Zephyr smiled again, a knowing smile. Good. Then let us see how well you handle the storm. The wind spirit raised his arms, and once again, the air around them began to stir, but this time it was different. Dark clouds gathered overhead, swirling together with alarming speed. Lightning crackled in the distance, and the once calm breeze turned into a fierce, biting gale. Kale braced himself, instinctively lowering into a defensive stance. You will not be flying this time, Zephyr said, his voice barely audible over the growing roar of the wind. This time, you will face the full fury of the storm. Before Kale could react, the storm was upon him. Winds lashed at him from all sides, pulling him in different directions, threatening to knock him off his feet. Rain began to pour, stinging his skin like needles, and the ground beneath him became slick with mud. He struggled to keep his footing, his vision blurred by the torrential downpour, but the wind was more than just a physical force. It felt alive, as if it were testing him, probing his defenses, trying to break him. Every time Kale found his balance, another gust would hit him, harder than the last. His muscles screamed in protest, and for a moment, he wondered if he could survive this. Then, amidst the chaos, he remembered Zephyr's words, "Surrender." Once again, Kale stopped fighting. He stopped trying to hold his ground, to push against the wind. Instead, he let it move him. He became like a reed in the storm, bending but never breaking. The wind pushed him, but he flowed with it, shifting his weight just enough to stay upright. Slowly, the storm began to change. It was still fierce, but Kale no longer felt as if it were trying to destroy him. He moved with the wind now, allowing it to guide his steps rather than force him to resist. His movements became fluid, almost graceful, as he danced with the storm. When the storm finally passed, leaving only a gentle breeze in its wake, Kale stood drenched and exhausted, but unbroken. He had survived. Zephyr approached him, his eyes filled with approval. "You have passed the second lesson. You understand now that to fly with the wind, you must be willing to bend, to move as it moves." Kale nodded, wiping rain from his face. "I think I understand." "Good," Zephyr said, his tone serious now. "But there is one final lesson. The most important of all." The wind spirit gestured toward the temple behind him. The stone doors groaned as they slowly creaked open, revealing a long, dimly lit corridor that led deeper into the mountain. "The sky wings are inside, waiting for you. But before you claim them, you must understand that they are not simply a tool for flight. They are a burden, a responsibility. The one who wears them must protect the balance of the winds." Kale hesitated, the weight of Zephyr's words sinking in. "What do you mean?" "The winds are more than just air, Kale," Zephyr explained. "They are the breath of the earth, the force that keeps everything in balance. To control them is to take on that responsibility. The freedom you seek comes at a cost. If you take the wings, you will be bound to the winds, to protect their flow, to ensure the balance remains." Kale stared into the corridor, his heart heavy with the realization of what lay ahead. He had wanted the wings for freedom, for the joy of flight. But now he understood that they came with a duty far greater than he had imagined. "Do you still wish to claim them?" Zephyr asked, his voice soft, yet firm. Kale swallowed hard. He had come so far, risked so much. And yet, the thought of taking on such a responsibility filled him with doubt. Was this the freedom he had sought? Or was it simply another form of chains, this time binding him to the wind itself? But then he thought of the journey he had taken, the trials he had endured. He had learned the wisdom of the wind, its power and its grace. And he had realized that true freedom was not about escaping responsibility, but about embracing it. The wings were not a tool for selfish desire, they were a gift, meant to be used for the good of all. Kale met Zephyr's gaze, his decision clear in his mind. "I will take them. I will protect the winds." Zephyr smiled, a genuine smile this time, free of mischief. "Then go, Kale. The wings are yours." Kale stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He entered the temple, the stone walls cold and silent around him. The corridor led him to a small chamber, and there, resting on a pedestal of polished stone, were the sky wings. They were magnificent. Made of a material that seemed lighter than air yet stronger than steel, they shimmered with a faint, ethereal glow. Kale approached them slowly, reverently. His hand trembled as he reached out, fingers brushing against the soft feathers. The moment his skin touched the wings, a rush of wind filled the chamber, swirling around him in a gentle embrace. He could feel the power within the wings, the ancient magic that coursed through them. But he could also feel the weight, the responsibility they carried. With a deep breath, Kale lifted the wings from the pedestal and fastened them to his back. They fit perfectly, as if they had been made for him. The wind surged around him, lifting him off the ground. Kale spread his arms, feeling the air beneath him, and then, with a single thought, he soared into the sky. The world below became a blur of color and light as Kale flew higher and higher, the wind carrying him effortlessly. He felt truly free, not just in body, but in spirit. He had found the freedom he had sought, but he had also found something more, purpose. As he soared through the sky, Kale knew that his journey was only just beginning. He was now the guardian of the winds, the protector of their balance. The sky wings had given him more than just the power to fly. They had given him the power to make a difference, and with that, Kale flew on, a new legend born in the skies.